I'm Erica Lynn, and we all know the ocean is the most demanding environment on Earth, consistently testing the reliability and durability of our equipment. When you spend as much time fishing as I do, you know that reliable gear is essential for staying on the water. This is why I went with the Abyss battery to power my trolling motor, electronics, and outboard. The guys at Abyss Battery are rattling the saltwater industry by manufacturing performance marine batteries specifically designed for sonar, outboards, trolling motors, and electronic fishing reels. They're also Bluetooth compatible, so I found checking battery statuses right on your phone while you're out on the water is a huge game changer. To learn more about why Abyss batteries are used by the pros and factory installed by premier boat builders, visit abyssbattery.com.
Hello and welcome to the Publicly Challenged Podcast. I'm your host, Luke Oswald, and I hope you join me on my quest for knowledge to become a better public land hunter, angler, and forager. Stick with this and who knows, maybe we will learn something together. All right, so now we're going to talk, Mark, we're going to sit here and we're going to talk about meal prep. So, with that being said, I have learned some cool things, and I think I might have even taught you something. So
you taught me several things today. I hate to say it, but you teaching the old dog a few tricks.
That's here. All right. So you've had problems in the past, and actually somebody else reached out to me recently and said, "How did it turn out? Mine always turns out like jerky. It's always tough and terrible. I only use ground meat." And you're
same talking
way,
about
right?
when it comes to dehydrating meat.
Yes.
And
you're the same way, right? You only use ground red meat.
No, I do chicken too. But
but I'm saying if you're using red meat,
yes. If I'm using red meat, I've been traditionally using mostly ground meat. Yes, or sausage. Some type of ground something.
Okay.
But I don't know if this is a good time to put this in there, but when I do use ground meat, I always run it through a blender. After it's cooked, cook the meat separately. Like if we're doing spaghetti or we're doing anything at all, we always cook the meat separate. And then we run it through the blender after it's cooked with a little bit of breadcrumbs. And what it does, it creates a wicking. It creates a binding agent, if you want to call it that.
Does it?
So when you
you
rehydrate it, it just instantly rehydrates that meat.
But does it make it to where it's like all super fine, small chunks, or what?
We don't like chop it up. We just kind of blend it.
Okay, so you're just kind of like mixing it in the blender.
Mixing it, good.
Okay.
So that the bread crumbs are really covering the surface areas of the meat. Does that make sense?
Yes, because for a second there, my wife, the way she would put that would be like you're making dog food. She tells me that sometimes.
Don't run it through the ninja.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you're mixing it together with the breadcrumbs.
Well, and I'll be honest with you. I mean, dehydrating. I mean, I'm sure you're going to. You probably know this, but guys, the smaller the particles, the better it comes out.
Yes.
There's just no doubt about it. I mean, if you want to have big chunks of meat and you want to have big chunks of vegetables, that's fine. But you got to be prepared for be a little crunchy and a little chewy sometimes.
Yep. And
so
possibly even cook it separate from whatever sauce or whatever you were.
That's right. So finely chopping things is really important when it comes to dehydrating meals, to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So anyway, meat. I wanted to get into this. How you did your meat here?
Okay, so I posted and you saw it, and then somebody else said, "Yeah, I do all my own meals. I dehydrate all my own meals. How do you get it to turn out?" Well, I don't know. I just thought I'm going to cook a roast first in the crock pot, just how I would make a crock pot roast. And Mark, you being from the Midwest, I know it's got to have gravy, right? And I texted you and I said, "Hey, you ever done gravy?" And I didn't get a response right away, so I was like, "Hell with it, I've got my gravy here." So the way I did the gravy, because I didn't want to waste, so I did strain it. I got all the particulate and everything out of it with cheesecloth. And then I put it in the pan and I used arrowroot starch to thicken it. And then I texted you and I never got an answer back until an hour later, and I was like, okay, it's going on the dehydrator, and I put it on and I posted. I don't know how this is going to turn out, but so it dried just like a fruit leather would.
So before you go any further, so did you add the Argo to it so that you could get it to stay on the sheets, or
Yes.
did you just want to thicken it?
Well, I knew that if I didn't thicken it, so I don't use Argo because corn, once again.
That's right. Okay.
But
what'd you?
I used arrowroot starch.
Arrowroot. Okay, I got you.
But
Sorry.
a binding thickening agent, just like cornstarch,
Right.
whatever else.
Right.
But, yeah.
Okay.
So, yes, I added that, and I made it to where it was thick gravy, to where it's sticking
Okay.
to the spoon as it's dripping off. That's the
Okay.
consistency I wanted. And I put that on the mats, just like you would, my silicone mats that I bought, just like you would a fruit leather. And I spread it out the same way Lampers is over there kind of jiggling it and turning it and getting it to spread out for a fruit leather. That's how I did it for the gravy. And it dried, and it worked good. My one thing I will say, though, I think next time I'm going to try and do it on parchment paper, because when it dried, and you almost have to break it up, because I did it both ways. I stuck the chunks in with some of the meat when I rehydrated it, and then the other one, I actually took it, and it was like shards of glass. So I put those shards in the first one, and the second one, I took those shards and actually ground them up in my food grinder, and then that's what I used. And then, like, if you made a powder, so you're essentially making a gravy powder is what I did with the second one, and that worked way better. It was consistent and kind of flowed through the product.
Well, what you're giving more surface area for the water to rehydrate.
Yeah, it worked out way better that way.
So what I do, just so you know, give another option, I don't use the parchment paper or the silicone for liquids. I use little small height baking trays, like metal baking trays.
Really?
Yeah. And I'll put them in there, and then about halfway done, I'll come down and use a spatula, flip it over sometimes, just because, you know, the nice thing about parchment paper is it breathes. So you can get some drying from the underneath side. But with the silicone, you don't really get that. And with the little trays that I use, you don't really get. So when I do chili and soups and stuff like that, I use these they're probably not even a half inch. I got them at the dollar store. They're just small little trays, baking sheets.
Like a cookie sheet?
Yeah, like a cookie sheet. Really lightweight, flimsy little cookie sheets. I've got like a dozen of them that fit on each tray of the 15 trays. And I use those. And that way I don't have to worry about anything. And what I like about the liquid is when you pour it in, it self-levels. So it's pretty consistent.
Yeah.
And then when it gets, you know, partially done or whatever, I'll come down the next morning. It doesn't really matter if there's any moisture to it. I'll break it up a little bit or flip it over, you know, just massage it a little. And then go from there. But I have not gotten to the point where I've had the shards. I haven't done anything yet that is a clearer type of gravy like you just did. So I don't have any recipes that I've used anything like that yet. So, but that's a good idea to grind it into powder, because I bet it rehydrates extremely well.
It rehydrates like it was an actual gravy that you just made. It worked out awesome. So
I'm most interested in this meat.
Yeah. So the meat itself, the roast, I used an arm roast, so it had the bone in there and made some really nice bone broth. One thing I did learn, I'll say before I get into the actual meat, I cooked it in the crock pot on low for like 12 hours. It was covered the whole time in broth. I used some beef broth, and I put vegetables in there. But what I found is the vegetables soak up, because I was like, oh man, I'm going to have roast with gravy. The vegetables soak up all the fats and oils and everything. So when you dehydrate them, I didn't even use them because they would go rancid, I think, pretty quick. Because no matter how long I dehydrated it, there was just that film of of the
Yeah.
of the fat from the roast on them, and it didn't go away. Like you could scoop it off like butter was on top of it. So I was like, man, that's bad. I know
Yeah.
from making jerkies and doing other dehydrated foods, that's just not a good thing to have, and it'll
Yeah.
go rancid. So what I came up with was take all your vegetables, cut them consistently even, and then steam them for just like 2 minutes, dehydrate them, and then throw them in. And then you got the gravy anyway once you rehydrate it. So it makes it perfect. Now you've got a roast with your vegetables and gravy and everything else, just like you would in the crock pot.
It's great.
But we'll get to that. So I cooked it in there like that to where it was falling apart with a fork. I think I had it on, it was probably about 12 hours on low. And then when I got up in the morning, I turned it off, let it cool, put it in a thing, and my wife put it in the fridge. When I got home, I just picked it apart, and it basically fell apart. You know, you could take a fork and shred it if you wanted to. And that's how I put it in the dehydrator, and they rehydrated really well that way.
That's great. That opens up a lot of. So basically, what you're doing, we talked about this before we got on the podcast, was with chicken. So I make a lot of meals. A lot of the meals I do, I make with chicken. And you really can't use chicken breasts very well, or, like just standard chicken. You really have to do the canned chicken that has a high moisture content, intercellular moisture, so that when it dehydrates, it is a more complete process. Otherwise, it's dehydrating the outside and it's shrinking it down. And it becomes real leathery, like jerky.
Yeah.
So canned chicken is the key if you're using chicken. But by doing this roast that way, you're basically recreating the chicken concept with the roast.
Yes. Yep.
And I think that was personally for me, that was your recipe for success on that one.
Now, I was planning on doing, I haven't gotten there yet, but I was going to take, my wife does it and she shreds it and makes it for like fajitas and enchiladas and stuff like that. She'll take a can of like Rotel tomatoes with the chilies in them and throw that in there, add some chicken broth, and then put chicken breast right in the crock pot, and it does the same thing, rehydrate it, and it falls apart with a fork. And I was going to try and use that on some recipes too.
I'm anxious to see that too, because yeah, we just, we've kind of gotten into the can. So easy to deal with that canned chicken. But it would be nice. You raise chickens, right?
I do. Yeah, I do.
So it'd be nice if you had a good way to do chickens of your own.
Yep.
Well, I'm anxious to see how that goes. So
yeah, and then we do another recipe where you put it, I use coconut aminos instead of soy sauce, but same concept, soy sauce, some ginger, some garlic and different things in there, and you make like an Asian style like chicken in the crock pot, and it marinates in that and falls apart, and it's so awesome. You could do a ton of different recipes with that too.
Yeah, I bet that, that's a good tip, man. I have not heard many people. I'll have to put that in my course and take full credit for that.
Why not, right?
That's I have not heard many people say that. So that was a nice tip right there.
So then some of the other things I've like, for instance, that I've done just for my meals, I really like next mile meals for backcountry meals, or even, to be honest, I'll take those with us if I'm going on a trip with my dad. We're going fishing for like a day or two, just because we'd rather get out on the boat and not have to worry about throwing a sandwich in the cooler. I packed my Jetboil. He thought he'd never seen it before, and I'm like, don't worry about lunch. I got lunch. He's like, really? You don't want to stop somewhere? I said, where am I going to stop and grab something? You know how I eat. And he goes, okay. And so I made him, I think I gave him a Mountain House, and I ate a Next Mile for myself. But anyway, he's like, that's freaking awesome. This is great. Oh, man. And he thought it was the coolest thing ever. So Father's Day, we ended up getting him a Jetboil, and he loves it. He takes it with him everywhere he goes now. He keeps it in the truck. And he's like, I'm not even going to stop anywhere anymore. So it's pretty cool that he's gotten into that world. So now I'm going to have to introduce him into the whole meal thing, and I'll probably end up making them for him. But Next Mile meals, makes one that I just got an email that they got to change the name because it's not made in Italy, believe it or not, but it's the Italian meatball. And I love that meal. And instead of noodles, they use zucchini.
Yeah.
And then they put the marinara with the meat in there, and they put cheese in it. We're going to get to the cheese in a minute.
Yeah, my wife does like a chicken curry. She does a curry squash using spaghetti squash, as the instead of noodles.
Absolutely, that's awesome. Have you dehydrated that for the backcountry yet, or no?
Yeah, it rehydrates amazing.
Yeah. So one thing I found, because I was like, I know if so. Anyway, I like a spicier meal. You and I were talking about this a little bit earlier. I want a little sweat on my brow when I'm eating it, and you're not going to get that from pretty much any meal that's out there on the market. You can be like Lampers and add your Tony Chachere's to everything, but then it kind of defeats the purpose of the healthiness to me. But adding all that sodium to it with it, but I made it, and I made the beef, and I made sure I drained off all the excess fat, and even took a paper towel and kind of sopped it up after I did my ground. But I added some smoked jalapeno powder to it and some red pepper flakes to make it just a little bit hotter. And then I added my marinara sauce. And then after I did that, the first go round, I took zucchini and I diced it up, and I was like, well, if I'm dehydrating it around like the 140 mark, it might kind of cook it anyway. And it rehydrated okay, but it was kind of a little rubbery. So the second go round, I took the zucchini and I just steamed it for like 3 minutes in the microwave in one of those steamer pots. Then I took it and I put it on the dehydrator trays, and that worked a lot better. It rehydrated, and it wasn't so rubbery. You could actually, like, it wasn't rubbery. You could eat it like it was just a normal piece of zucchini that was cooked.
The key, we're kind of talking about the same concept with everything here. The key is to introduce moisture into the cooking process. When you're steaming the vegetables, you're steaming the moisture into the vegetable.
Yes.
You're the same with the meat. You're pressure cooking, not really, but you're crock pot cooking and basically boiling that meat to introduce intercellular moisture. So the key is with all these meals is to make sure that the moisture is permeated through before it dehydrates, because what it happens is the dehydration process sucks that moisture out, and the void that it leaves, is then refilled with the hot water when you introduce that hot water. But if you don't create the void, it creates a closed cell, for lack of a better word. I know I'm getting real technical here.
You're getting nerdy.
Not really.
Kind of like e-scouting.
Not really, but I'm acting like I know what I'm talking about. It seems like to me that it closes it off and it can't reintroduce the moisture, like jerky-ish. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, and that makes it rubbery. That totally makes sense. I get it now. I didn't even until we started talking about it. I'm like, well, that's what I need to do. But now, yeah, it totally makes sense. So let's talk about this, though. Now I'm eating it, and even a guy at work had it, and he's like, man, that's awesome. And I even dehydrated I sliced up some black olives and threw those in there, too, which is pretty good, too. But I need the cheese on there, man. Have you ever dehydrated cheese?
Oh, yeah, I dehydrate cheese all the time.
Do you?
Yeah.
And like you just got to make sure it's like a lower fat cheese, or what do you do? I mean, like 120?
No, I think that's one of the reasons, because some of my meals, that's one of the reasons that I put them in the freezer.
Okay.
Now let's just be honest. When you pull them out of the freezer and you take them for a few days of unrefrigerated, let's be honest, nothing's going to happen in a couple days. I mean, unless you're like, I don't know, if you live in Illinois or some stupid place like that, I mean, it could be 100 degrees. That could be a problem. But
yeah,
here in the beautiful state of Montana, we don't have that problem. So in case you didn't notice it on the summit.
I have noticed. It's wonderful.
So, but yes, no, I'm experimenting with cheese. It's something I'm working with. And by the time my course comes out, I'm going to have that cheese situation dialed. But right now, I do a lot of meals with cheese.
Are you putting the cheese in later on the meals, or are you
No,
taking?
I'm cooking them. So here's the other key. I was hoping you'd say something like this. I believe that the meals are better done if you cook them together and let the sauces and the moisture cook through the products versus cooking everything individually and adding it to the bag. I don't feel like it combines well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're not getting the flavor. No, I totally agree with
You're
that.
just not getting it. I've tried spaghetti. I've tried lots of things separate because I thought, man, I can control it better. But it is not better. It's better if you cook the meal just like you'd eat it.
Yeah.
But when in doubt, Lucas, add more water. When in doubt, make sure it's got more hydration when you're cooking it.
Okay.
You're better off, in my opinion, like jambalaya, for example. My wife cooks this amazing jambalaya. It's one of my flagship meals. It's next to pad thai. It's probably number 2.
Ooh.
But she cooks it pretty thick. So when you put it out, it's like a clump, it just plops on. But we've figured out that if we add a little more moisture, make it a little more soupy-ish, which we would not want to eat it that way.
Right.
But it dehydrates incredibly well that way. And then when we rehydrate it, I add in however much water, which I actually want to mention that as well, but add in however much water you want to for the consistency you want, obviously.
So,
but I've learned that you add more moisture. Always, when in doubt, add more moisture.
That's a good.
You just can't go wrong.
Rule of thumb. Yeah. The one thing
it's going to go away. It's going to go away anyway. So it's not going to hurt anything. And I think it helps permeate the vegetables and to make sure that you've got if you're doing rice, whatever you're doing, that it's at its maximum hydration point. If that makes sense?
Yeah, I think the one thing like with the zucchini though, I wanted to cook it separate because I knew when I was doing it in the sauce and simmering it would just kind of turn to mush anyway, and I wanted.
But my point is, you did that on purpose. It was a planned part of the meal prep.
Yes. Yeah.
Which you might have done if you were making it just to eat anyway, right?
Correct. Yes. Yeah.
So that's the whole point. Cook it just like you would do it if you were going to eat it, like right after you finished.
Yeah. So then the next thing I made, which was awesome, I made like a breakfast hash, but I made it spicy. One of my favorite other meals is the Mountain House breakfast hash and the spicy Southwest one. The newer one that they have out. It's awesome. But so I wanted to replicate it, and I came up with my own. And I used some of the roast meat. So I took the roast meat, but I added the diced green chilies, a can of those to it, and then a little bit of the jalapeno powder. And then I cheated, but I'm sure you could dehydrate your own potato shreds, but they already make them. You can go to Costco and Sam's Club and buy, it's almost like a milk carton, but it's like a 2-pound thing of shredded potatoes that are dehydrated. So I added a cup and a half of those to it and then put it together with the green chili and all that. So I dehydrated the roast with the green chilies and that stuff. And then green pepper I added to it and did all that. And the one thing I think I got to figure out, though, is how to cook the green peppers because I cooked them in the skillet, but they still were kind of greasy.
I wouldn't worry about that much. No, if you're putting that, the key, the killer is oxygen.
Yeah.
You're not going to get, I know some microbiologists that listen to this podcast.
Be sending some hate mail.
I have a microbiology degree. Some freaking microbiologist is going to question me on this shit when I say it. But you're not going to introduce anaerobic bacteria that frequently in dehydrated meals. they're going to be aerobic. So if you can eliminate that oxygen, you're not going to get significant growth of anything that's going to hurt you. I know somebody's going to say you're completely wrong on that. But,
so you're saying don't worry too much about like when I cooked it in the skillet.
Let's be honest, okay? You're going to cook, if you're doing hamburger of any kind.
Yeah.
You're introducing grease. I don't care how much you dab it, double, whatever you say you do with the paper towel, whatever you do. You're not going to be 100%.
No, I was just trying to lessen it, but
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But my point is, you're never going to be able to remove it all. So, believe it or not, one of my favorite ones we do is enchiladas.
Yeah.
So my wife cooks them straight in the pan, just like she would cook them with multi-layer handmade tortillas, with the cheese and the meat and the chili sauce, just with the cheese on top, just like she would serve it.
Well, hang on, Mark, real quick. Let's talk for the listeners then. Are they flour or corn tortillas?
They're flour, because why would you eat corn?
I don't know. A lot of people make masa tortillas.
Whatever. You can do whatever you want. Doesn't matter. I mean, you're such a purist. I don't even know if I can talk. I don't know if I can even speak to you. I don't even eat
the corn ones anymore.
Oh God. So for the rest of us that live in the real world, normal people that live in the real world. So this is a good tip. I take this enchilada thing, okay, and I take a pizza cutter, the round, circular pizza cutter. And I just dice and slice the crap out of that thing while it's in the tray. Once it cools just a little bit. And then I just slice. Because what you want to do is introduce the airspace. The binding space. That's the key. With all this stuff is small chops, small particles, cutting your vegetables small. My wife keeps sending me stuff down here that's got like giant pieces of green peppers. I'm like, honey, this is going to take forever to rehydrate. But she likes that. She likes those big chunky vegetables, Broccoli. I mean, whole things of broccoli she sends down here to be dehydrated. I'm like, we got to cut this up a little bit. And, but anyway, I chop it up with this pizza cutter and then I spread it. So when you cook a meal, another tip here, use the pizza cutter, cut it up. It works great. Number 2 is when you make a meal, it's better to put it in the dehydrator when it's warm. And the reason I say that is because once it goes into your refrigerator, 2 things happen. 1, it condenses and becomes hard and you can't spread it evenly. As efficiently, for sure. Number 2, the moisture is evaporating. All that moisture that you introduced is evaporating in the refrigerator. And so I know it's hard sometimes, but I try to prepare the meals that we're going to do and put them right in the dehydrator right after they're finished. I know, because I say that because earlier you mentioned that you put it in the refrigerator and the next day you broke it apart and did it, which you can definitely do.
Yeah, that was the roast.
You can definitely do it. You can definitely do it that way. But I have found that it's way easier to do it that way.
When my roast was put in the fridge, though, it was still in the bone broth. So
it was still wet and moisture. So it worked out great. So the other thing, too, is when I'm spreading it. So again, I know I sound like a broken record, but dehydration is all about consistency. So when I talked about the fruit being the same thickness, well, your meals, when you spread them, need to be similar thickness. And the way I do it is I use parchment paper.
Yep.
And I'll put a couple cups, whatever fits your tray. I put a dab in the middle, and then I take a second piece of parchment paper and put on top of. Let's say I'm doing the one that you really will not eat.
Your pad thai.
Chili mac. No, let's just say pad thai. It's our number 1 recipe. Everybody asks me for that recipe. It's the number one. It's on my website, but it's our number one. Take a blob of pad thai on there. Then I take a second piece of parchment paper, put on top, and then I spread it either by hand or rolling pin. And I roll it out and then I peel the parchment paper up, put it in the thing, and then use that same piece of parchment paper, for the rest of the trays.
Then you're not losing food either.
You're not losing product, and you're getting real consistent thickness. Not perfect, but better than if you try to do it with a spoon.
Yeah.
And I found that if you try to do it with a spoon or a spatula or something, you just can't get it consistent. You just can't. And you're going to get different levels. You know that. You're going to get different levels of dryness throughout your. So what you're going to end up doing if you do that is you're going to over dehydrate some areas and under dehydrate others.
Yeah.
And then you got kind of hodgepodge of things, which it'll probably work out.
That's
okay,
when you get that crunchy meat in your meal. When
that's right. That's when you get it introduces a lot of factors that that you don't really. Then let me put it, less desirable factors, maybe we should say.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah. So, when you're doing your meals, then how do you portion them out? So, like, I talked to a guy, the dialed in hunter, Josh Kirshner, which pretty cool. He still uses Ziploc bags, and I'm like, dude. And he's like, yeah, I've got some. They've gotten holes poked in them or whatever. Or the zipper pops open and it dumps into my pack, so I'm scraping my food out of my pack. I'm like, oh no, man, you got to use the Mylar.
So he uses the Ziploc bags.
Yeah, but so the way he does,
no way.
The way he does the portioning of it is he takes spoons and he's like, yeah, normally I put about 2 or 3 spoons on my plate. However, how much he would spoon onto a plate or into a bowl is how he portions it on each section of the tray or on each tray. What are you doing to get a consistent measure to where you're like, yeah, that's a good amount where I'm going to be full and I actually got a good meal?
All right, well, let's just be honest. I'm bigger than normal.
Well, right. I'm a fat kid, and I get it.
And so for me, Mountain House is pretty satisfying, the amount.
Right. It's 2.5 meals. Some of them are even 3.
Yeah. So when I'm hunting elk all day, I don't eat a lot. I'm just going to be honest during the day. When I'm in a serious situation, elk hunting, I'm a 1 meal a day kind of guy.
Right.
And I'm going to do some snacks and things through the day, but we're not doing lunches. I don't even do that much breakfast. I'm hitting the road quick. I'm doing some of these packaroon things and those kinds of things. Now I do I do some biscuits and gravy meals if we're a little more relaxed situation, but for the most part, I'm running and gunning, and the evening meal is really important to me. So I go probably a little more than some, but what I do, and I found consistent between just about everything I do, all the meals that we make, I make I guess I got about 15 different things I make on a consistent basis. And what I do is I do 2 cups of dehydrated product, maybe slightly less, meaning like 1 3/4 to 2 cups of the dehydrated meal, whatever it is. So I don't worry about what goes on the tray. Mm-hmm. I go the maximum amount. Whatever I can get on that tray, I get on it. And then when I get it done, I have a Tupperware container, and I take the parchment paper and I bend it in half and it slides right off. Parchment paper is like gold. I'm just telling you. Slides right off into my thing. Into my Tupperware container, and I do all 8 trays at once into the same Tupperware container. And then I take literally the 2-cup cup, plastic cup, and I use the bottom of it to break up the product into a finer consistency. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No.
Just break it up. Yeah. And then I take the same cup and I scoop up 2 cups and I put it in the Mylar bag, and that's it. And then the way I rehydrate it, this is a really key point, I think. is I get the bag, I pull the oxygen absorber out, I shake all the product down to where it's pretty. I don't pack it down. I just make sure it's down good. And then I add the hot water until the point where it just crests the top of the product, of the meal. No matter what meal it is, I'll add just enough water to where it will fill up the bag until it just comes over the top. Barely. I mean, barely.
Yeah, just where you could see it, right?
Just where you could see the water above, and then I seal it.
That's how I do it. That's how I found
and that works almost every time, every meal.
Because I found if you go any more than that, you end up getting a watery product.
Yes,
and
too
if
soupy.
You go less,
here's the thing about hot water: you can always add more water. You can't take it out.
Yep. And if you go less, you can always add more. That's what I was going to say. If you don't, you get crunchy. But
but I found that, from pad thai to chili mac to soups to chili. I do this cheeseburger pie, which you're not allowed to have, but it's incredible.
Why can't I have a cheeseburger pie?
It's got the dill pickles in it.
I can eat that. Man. That sounds good. Some ground mustard.
It's unbelievable.
What
I do shepherd's pie.
That's a good one. We do that too. You know what else? I don't know if you've ever tried it, but mashed sweet potatoes on top instead of regular potatoes.
Well, I'm getting ready to start getting serious about that after I had those fruit leathers like that.
No, I'm serious. We love sweet potatoes in this house. We're kind of like the Lampers when it comes to that. Sweet potatoes are amazing. And my wife made shepherd's pie, but she put whipped sweet potatoes on. She whipped them up with the hand mixer and put those on top. And it was like, oh my gosh, this is so good. So you might want to look into that.
No, I'm definitely gonna. Shepherd's pie is one of my favorite meals, my personal favorites. I love the pad thai; it's probably my all-time favorite. The jambalaya is probably my number 2, and then it's a close call between the chicken pot pie, shepherd's pie, and the cheeseburger pie. Those 3 are pretty solid number 3s. Good old Missouri food there, buddy.
Let's talk about the cheeseburger pie. What's that got in it then?
Well, for one, I'm the producer, okay? I'm not the creator. I'm the equipment runner. My wife is the master of the cooking. My wife is a freaking amazing cook.
So it's got like pickles, cheese?
Yeah, it's got it's basically cheeseburgers without the bread.
Does it got tater tots? What's it got?
It's got the mashed potatoes like the shepherd's pie.
Dude, I can eat all that.
It's got mustard. The key is kind of like, I think the key between the shepherd's pie and this, I'm talking out of my lane because that's my wife's lane. But I think it's mustard and dill pickles is the difference.
Well, yeah. But
and the mustard, and the thing is about mustard, I don't eat mustard on very many things.
It's good.
I'm just not a mustard guy.
Yeah.
But in that, it's incredible.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So no, we do that. Now I will tell you one thing that I have not been able to master that I love. The only meal that I love from Mountain House is stroganoff.
That's a simple one.
I can't master it in the dehydrating world. I don't know if it's the sour cream. I don't know. I haven't quite narrowed down what is the problem, but it tastes old. Like it tastes, what's the word?
Mark, this is one of the times I think you may have to make your sauce separate.
I know.
Grind it up into a powder and
you're
then
right.
put it in the bag.
You're right. I think you're right. And, but I'm wondering about the milk. If the milk is the problem.
Maybe.
Because, it's like, milk and cheese. All of it kind of goes. I haven't had the problem with cheese. But with sour cream, it seems like it's the sour cream. I'm not sure that's the problem, but I think that's the only ingredient that we don't dehydrate any other ways. but I have not been able to replicate. And my wife makes like world famous freaking stroganoff, and I can't get it to taste perfect.
Hmm.
It's not like it's intolerable. It's kind of like I can't even think of the word.
Like slightly soured or something.
It's not even soured. It's like it's old, like it's stale.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So maybe you with your master meat processor that you got there.
Well, yeah, that, and I think I'm gonna have to come up with like a paleo-ish recipe for that now, and I'll use probably like instead of noodles, I'll use spaghetti squash or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know
But
it
I
does.
am interested in so eggs is another thing, just doesn't cut it
Yeah,
in the dehydrating.
I haven't figured that one out. I tried the other day. I tried an egg.
Eggs are terrible.
Yeah.
I don't know, and I've read that. So people substitute polenta for eggs a lot.
Well, here's the other thing you
Uh,
could do. You could buy freeze dried egg
that's right. You can buy and add them to it.
and
That's
just
right.
add
That's what
it
I was
to
getting ready
it.
to say.
Yeah, you could totally do that. I think there's a few things. Just like I cheated with the potato shreds. Why am I going to take my time to introduce moisture into a potato, partially hydrate it, dehydrate it, and then throw it in a dehydrated meal when I can spend like $8 and get 2 pounds of dehydrated potato?
The only thing I'll say about that is what I said earlier is like shepherd's pie and the things like that. I've
Well,
tried it that
yeah,
way.
that's different. Yeah.
There's something about that flavor being pre-cooked into it.
Yeah. I could see that. I could totally see that. But I did.
I don't know that it's perfect. I don't know that it's I don't know that it's worth not doing it, but I do notice a slight difference with that. The other thing about sour cream is I haven't experimented with this, but it's my next step is you can buy powdered sour cream too.
That might be an option too then.
And so you can introduce that without trying to rehydrate. I just got a feeling it's this milk or lactose or just something about I don't know. I don't know enough about that chemical process to figure out what to do just yet. But I
Working
do
on it
like
though.
the stroganoff, and I've got the meat figured out. And now that you've introduced this roast concept to me, that's going to be even better that's got me more motivated to try to figure out the stroganoff problem because I went to hamburger meat with the stroganoff, which is fine,
That's not as good though.
but it
I'll
is
agree.
not as good as the roast would be.
So let's talk about your chicken pot pie. What do you use for like biscuits, or is
Oh
it an
man, you're
actual
asking
crust on
me
top?
the questions. So it's the same as. So here's another tip that we do with the chicken pot pie is the same as the bear biscuits and gravy. You do the chicken pot pie separate.
Yep.
Just make the base just like your gravy, your white gravy. Make it separate. Dehydrate it separate. Make your biscuits. I put them in the same time, but the point is not on the same trays.
So you
Dehydrate
dehydrate the biscuits.
dehydrate the biscuits, absolutely.
So you use a pizza cutter and cut them all up then?
Just crumble them
Crumble 'em?
with your hand,
Okay.
whatever way. Now, I don't, with the bread though, I found that you don't have to get as fine with it as you do some of the other stuff. It can be a little more chunkier. You don't have to make it like powder, like that.
Yeah.
Because I don't like it like that when I eat it anyway. I want it to be like as normal, as close to reality as possible. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So anyway, what I've started doing with that is we dehydrate let's do it with biscuits and gravy because bear biscuits and gravy is one of my favorite breakfasts that I do. I do ground bear sausage, sage bear sausage,
Yum.
and gravy. It's freaking phenomenal. And then we use the bear fat to make the homemade biscuits,
Oh.
and then the rendered bear fat. And then I dehydrate them separate, and then I crumble the biscuits up and I'll figure out what 2 biscuits or 3 biscuits is per cup, in my cup, which is about a cup,
Mm-hmm.
cup and a half crumbled up. And then I'll add those to a second little, one of those little like sandwich Ziploc bags.
Yeah.
So when I package it, I put the dehydrated gravy in the Mylar with the oxygen absorber. Okay. And then I put the biscuits in a little Ziploc, like sandwich bag, and put those inside the Mylar bag as well and seal it all up. So then when I open it, I pull out the biscuits, I pull out the oxygen absorber, I add the hot water, but I add more hot water than, above the top a little bit more than we talked about earlier.
Yep.
And then about halfway through the process, I introduce the biscuits.
Gotcha. So
it's a little more of a
soggy,
manipulation, but oh man, it's worth the process. So then what you get is you get your rehydrated biscuits, but they're a little more taste like actual biscuits.
Oh, that's awesome.
And instead of being mushy, now it still tastes good the other way. Don't get me wrong. I love it just all together, but it is more of a quote mush, so to speak.
Yeah.
But if you do the biscuits and add them halfway, say 10, I usually do 20 minutes for my meals. You can do less, but I usually do 20 minutes. And so at 10 minutes, I throw the biscuits in, make sure there's, enough water. If not, I add a little bit more and mix it up so that you got two different levels of rehydration going on at the same time, if that makes sense.
Yep. That's awesome.
And the same with the chicken pot pie. Now, I don't always do that, but I've started doing it. The chicken pot pie, I'm pretty good with it just all the same, even though it's a little mushy. It's just so dang good. But I'm playing with anything that has biscuits or that bread topping kind of stuff, keeping it separate and adding it, reintroducing it halfway through the process.
So let's talk about what's one thing that you've done as far as food prep or something like that was just an absolute mistake and a complete waste, so other people don't do that.
Well, one of the biggest mistake I made at first was cooking the hamburger, leaving it in big chunks and not putting the breadcrumbs in it. Because it turns out like little BBs. Yeah, I mean, it's not bad, but it's just not ideal.
It's not soft
but
enough, yeah.
Doing it finer and adding the breadcrumbs was a game changer with any kind of ground meat products. And for me, the canned chicken was a game changer.
Because of the hydration.
Now that you've kind of mentioned this crock pot idea, I'm going to do some experimenting with that with chicken. But
or even your Instapot, if you guys have an Instapot.
Yeah. Anything like any kind of pressure cooking type situation.
Yeah.
I think that could really be going. Because I mean, basically, that's what you're getting. You're getting pressure cooked chicken. That's what it is.
Yeah. So the other thing, my wife uses that recipe that I talked about earlier with the soy sauce and all that stuff and the ginger and everything in the crock pot is thighs, because they have more moisture in them anyway.
Oh,
makes it even better. Yeah.
Wow.
So there's that little tidbit.
That's a good tip too. Man, this podcast is full of tips.
But I think that we just pretty much hammered out a bunch of meals there. What about snacks? Do you make a bunch of different kind of snacks in a dehydrator?
Those coconut ball packaroons are gold.
I can't believe. Like I said, I'm a fat kid, so I make mine as big as a hockey puck almost. I actually use the ring from the mason jar. Like a narrow mouth, not a wide mouth, but a narrow mouth ring, and that's what I use as my form to cut and shape my packaroons. Do
they dehydrate well that big?
It just takes longer. They still dehydrate well that big. Well, because if you think about it, it's the same thickness as your ball when you're using a cookie scooper.
They're just bigger. Yeah,
they're just
that's right.
Bigger in size.
Right. How long are those taking you?
12 hours.
Okay.
12 hours. And actually, I think I could probably go 10 and get away with it. It just kind of depends a little bit on the moisture in them, I guess. But because I've done them with cherries in them, so I like putting cherries, cocoa nibs, and pecans and that is like a killer combination. But when I leave the cherries, dried cherries, I buy dried cherries, but they're still kind of moist anyway, like a
Right.
like a fresh raisin that's not like been sitting around for a long time. And so I think that when I dice up the cherry, it works a lot better in there. And I'd say probably 10 hours you could do something that size at like 40 degrees or whatever it is.
Yeah, we introduced with the last batch we did a nut butter.
Ooh.
And it left them they were a little greasy on the bottom, but I went like 14 or 15 hours with them with that little bit more grease, and they seem to be amazing. Now they tasted good. The verdict is still out on how long they'll store.
Yeah.
And the verdict is still out because we ate them all. I didn't even get a chance to freaking.
That's the thing.
Those things didn't last. They never even made it into the bag. Those things never even made it in the bag. They got eaten off the tray.
They're good. They're delicious. I times my recipe by 5. The recipe that's on the Lamper's website that they give, I times it by 5 because it's just not enough, especially when I'm making them that big. I want to put 2 of those per Mylar bag, and then I can keep it somewhere handy. And when I pull it apart, I have one and I'm eating it, and I can have the other one in my pocket and pull it out later and eat it.
And see, now that's one of those occasions, if you're going to do the Mylar bag for 2 of those, that's one of those cases where you're going to want to have the air and seal it because that'll keep it from breaking it up so much.
Yes. And that's what I do.
It gives it like a little bit of a little padding, so to speak.
Well, I don't know. They haven't broke up. I've never had one.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, I just started making them.
Well, actually, I threw one. Okay, I'll admit, like I threw one like pretty far for my wife to catch it. She didn't catch it. It hit the driveway, and that one, it was in like it was in 3 pieces, but it was still, you know what I mean. You can still grab it, and eat it. It wasn't like it crumbled into a million pieces.
Okay.
But that's because I have it in the hockey puck, I guess. So. That's about the size of it.
This was our first time making them. We just made them first time.
Oh.
So
see, I'm developing a recipe right now for those, which I don't have it down yet. I've experimented and I've done small batches on it. It hasn't been right yet, but I'm trying to do carrot cake.
Oh man.
Yeah. So once I get that, I'll get you the recipe for that.
That'll be awesome. Well, you know what? We're doing a recipe for the course. We're doing a whole complete recipe book. And I'm gonna have to steal your pot roast recipe, and I'm probably gonna steal this one too. So
that's fine. Actually, Gina Shively, which I interviewed Wild Well Fed on the podcast on this show, she is helping develop recipes for Heather's Choice. She works with Heather. She lives up in Alaska.
Oh, great!
And her and I were messaging back and forth on ideas, and I said I really want to do a carrot cake. I think that would just be awesome with like the raisins in it and the carrot and like nutmeg and cinnamon. I still haven't quite figured out to just make it to where it's like that extra little bit sweet, but I'm working on it. So that's more to come on that, and it's going to be good. I love carrot cake, man. So.
Man, that sounds great.
All right.
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
What were you going to say? I'm sorry, I cut you off there.
I was going to say, so, we've mentioned some of these. I don't have everything, but a few of these recipes we've been talking about, like the pad thai and the gear, and, equipment and my recommendation that I've got several blog articles at treelinepursuits.com that on my actual, my website that has separate from treelineacademy.net, but treelinepursuits.com has several of these articles about dehydrating meals, equipment, and some few recipes and things like that. But there's more to come. But there are a few there already.
And then, like we talked about, the Lampers also have some. I don't have
Lampers, Hunt Harvest Health. Yeah, Hunt Harvest Health.
But if anybody does want any of the things I've talked about, I can devise a recipe. Hit me up, and I'll either send it to you direct message, or I can even post it on my website as well. So
that'd be great.
Yeah. And then, man, I think that's about it. We talked about a lot of stuff here.
It's good stuff, man.
Yeah.
It's fun. I haven't done a Dehydrated Meals podcast in a while. Last one I did, I was on a YouTube channel for Wilderness Ridge Trail Llamas. We did a Dehydrated Meals YouTube episode.
I know you've got Stubblefield hooked on your pad thai and some of your other recipes. So
Stubblefield's hooked on anything my wife wants to cook for him. Let's just be honest.
No, him and his wife he even posted it. Him and his wife were cooking them and throwing them in the dehydrator.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. They kept texting us every 5 minutes, like, okay, what's in this? What's in that? What's in this?
Well, if he takes your course that you're coming up with here, then
the first time, another quick story before we close out. So my first experience with Mr. Stubblefield, he was the first guy I met in Missoula. I mean, of all the people I could have met, he was the first. I mean, of the quality people I could have met,
yeah,
it was him. So the first time I met him, I was in the middle of bidding on a bow, a stalker recurve, and I was in the middle of it. I was $1,000-some into this auction, and at the BHA rendezvous, we had just moved to Missoula. We actually came a little early because I wanted to go to the rendezvous. So we had just gotten in town. We've only been here a couple days. So I got to meet Brian Call with the Gritty podcast, and I did a podcast with him at that rendezvous, and I met Ty Stubblefield. So anyway, I'm in the banquet bidding on this bow, and he's trying to take my wife. He doesn't even know me. He's trying to take my wife up to the bar to buy her drinks, so I keep bidding so she's not at the table.
That's some shady stuff there, huh?
That's Ty in a nutshell. That is exactly Ty in a nutshell. But I love the guy.
It was for a good cause, right? So
he's a good guy. He's quality. He's quality people, man. No doubt about it. Him and Josh, some of the funniest podcasts I've been on. Probably, if you just want to laugh and not learn a thing, then go to Shooting the Bull podcast and listen to a couple of our mule deer hunting episodes when we were in the Missouri River breaks.
I've heard
hunting mule deer.
It's
the three of us.
It's a minimum 3 beer minimum podcast, right? Isn't that?
It's crazy. But you won't learn a single thing about mule deer, and you won't learn a single thing about anything. But it's kind of funny, to be honest. But yeah, those guys they were some of the first two guys I met here, and we've done a few hunts together now, and we float a lot together and duck hunt together, and so they're good quality dudes.
That's cool, man. So we're gonna probably wrap it up there. Once again, if anybody hasn't listened to any of the podcasts before, where can they find you, find your recipes, find your e-scouting course, all that stuff?
Well, probably the best resource to get access to my YouTube channel, to get access to the blog articles with all the recipes and equipment, and articles I've written for GoHunt.com, and I'm starting to do some articles for Rockslide as well. Some of my digital scouting stuff is all at treelinepursuits.com. And then the e-scouting course you can access it through treelinepursuits.com as well, but it's on a standalone address at treelineacademy.net.
All right. Man, Mark, thank you so much for coming on, talking food.
It was great. I really enjoyed it. I haven't talked about dehydrated meals for a few weeks here, so it's time.
I'm in the middle of gear, right?
I'm doing all my meals right now, so it's really good timing, and I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure it's been a real honor to meet you and get to spend time with you at the summit. That was really cool, and it's been a pleasure.
It's awesome hanging with you, and I'm sure hopefully in the future here we can get together a little more.
I mean, other than the fact that you live in Illinois, that's kind of the only.
Yeah, don't hold that against me. I hold that against myself. So,
I've left that life behind. I saw the light a long time ago.
Yeah. But so anyway, Mark, it's been good talking to you, and thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and coming on the show.
All right.
Once again, thank you so much for listening to the Publicly Challenged podcast. I hope you enjoyed the show, and if you did, please subscribe on whatever platform it is you're listening to. Also, if you could leave a review, that would help us out. And you can check us out on Instagram or at publiclychallenged.com. And once again, thank you so much for listening to the show.